what is your understanding of the situation as it stands now?
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be with you. Right now, Israel is saying that what Hamas agreed to is not what the offer that was put on the table. In other words, they're saying Hamas is committing a bait and switch, that Hamas is agreeing to terms that Israel never agreed to, that were not negotiated by the Egyptians and by the Qataris, that right now this is about Hamas trying to pretend there's a deal, either to buy time or to try to box Israel into a corner. And it may be working if you look at protests in Tel Aviv, if you look at some of the international reaction. But whatever the reality is of what Hamas responded to, what we know is that it's not the deal that Israel signed up to just over a week ago.
So what kind of position, Jonathan, does this put Bibi Netanyahu in, domestically and abroad, when you think about how the administration is likely to be reacting to this news?
Yeah, domestically, it's a real challenge. Hostage families and Israelis as a whole have been calling for a temporary ceasefire for months now that would bring another set of hostages home. The November release of hostages seems like a lifetime ago. And really, there's increasing pressure in Israel for Benjamin Netanyahu and the coalition to make progress on the hostages being released. It's seeming more and more likely that more and more, unfortunately, have already passed away in captivity. The number of hostages originally sought by Israel was 40. There was some negotiations that seemed to indicate that Hamas may not have 40 hostages, and so the number was brought down to 33. And so domestically, obviously, families and Israelis as a whole want the hostages home. Internationally, it's a real challenge because what Netanyahu is saying now is, look, we're going to go ahead with the operation in Rafah. That is almost certainly partly to pressure Hamas, but it doesn't mean there isn't a real operation behind there, which the administration is going to be incredibly concerned about because it is not what the administration has said is okay. The administration has said you haven't done enough, Israel, to protect civilians, to protect those who need to get out. And unless you do that, Operation Rafah should not be commencing.
Well, and if they do indeed pursue that operation in Rafah in the interim between now and whenever they actually can reach an agreement, if it's at all possible, on a temporary ceasefire, would that operation not make it all the more difficult to eventually come to that kind of agreement? If Israel has already moved in to take out the remaining Hamas battalions, what incentive would Hamas have to return hostages?
Yeah, it certainly could. You're right. I think what the key is, what is the scope of the operation? In other words, what you haven't heard from Israel is whether or not the operation is a full-scale operation to clear Rafah in the same way that it cleared Gaza City, that it cleared Khan Yunis, or whether the goal here is something marginal around the edges, simply to increase the pressure. You have about 1.3 million people in Rafah, and the Israeli evacuation order today called for only about 110,000 of them in the east to leave immediately. That suggests that maybe the operation is not nearly as wide scale as folks would think a full operation would be. And so it may be as much about Israel preparing and getting pressure and laying the groundwork, not that it's immediately going to undertake an operation.
All right. It's great to kind of get you to contextualize and help us understand what exactly is happening. And frankly, this is not the conversation we necessarily thought we would be having today. All of this has been developing in real time. Something else we thought perhaps would get more attention today was the fact that over the weekend, Israel ordered the shutdown of Al Jazeera in the country. We saw a raid of those offices. Obviously, there has been accusations that Al Jazeera was working in concert with Hamas. But how should we be thinking about the distribution of information in Israel as we talk about the domestic pressures on Bibi Netanyahu? How should we read the control of what actual Israelis are getting to see, what reporting they get to see?
Look, the shutdown is very, very concerning, especially for those of us who view Israel as a liberal democracy. The reality is when you start shutting down independent television stations, even if they're reporting things that you don't like, even reporting things that you may loathe, it starts to get very, very concerning in terms of autocratic-like tendencies. Whether or not that is the case here, I think, is still an open question. One of the challenges is that Al Jazeera's programming in Arabic is not the same as Al Jazeera's programming in English. In fact, there's a long history of in Arabic of using phrasing and terminology, martyrdom, that really is, if not offensive, incredibly concerning. And so I think that balance is very hard, but it is concerning.
Yeah, and certainly as a journalist, we took note of it here at Bloomberg today. Finally, Jonathan, of course, something else we've been following here at home is the ongoing protests on college campuses across the country. Columbia University today canceled its primary main commencement proceedings. They'll have a bunch of smaller ceremonies instead, in part because of what we have seen taking place on that campus in recent weeks. To what extent do you think the protests here are influencing what is happening in the region? Is it emboldening Hamas? Is it emboldening Israel? How do you consider that factor?
I certainly think that the region is taking note of it. I mean, I think more than anything, what the region is looking at is saying, look, this is a demonstration that even if we don't have victory immediately, even if we don't have an independent Palestinian state, the reality is American youth is moving in that direction, and we should be really excited about that prospect. I think that's probably a little bit overstated, to be honest, but certainly it's having an influence and an impact on how people in the region are thinking about it. And you're hearing that messages when U.S. officials are going, when think tank academics are going, you're hearing people say, look, the view is we can just wait out Israel. We don't need to even have peace with Israel. Really, there's a much, much more pro-Palestinian youth in the U.S. that's going to come and be there to rescue us and to help us in the future. Again, I think that's a little bit of a misread, and I've cautioned some of my friends in the region against reading it as such. But it is a real issue that has to be addressed, and I think this is just the beginning of it.